those types of fields of habit energy that shackle us, that keep us imprisoned and enslaved and not free. And the first three fetters are the three that are, for the moment, the only ones I've been working with. And the first three fetters are clinging to self-identity, doubt, and clinging to rites and rituals. I've mostly been thinking in the last couple of weeks about the interplay between doubt and self-identity. That the form of doubt that's most prevalent amongst us being people living in North America in the 21st century who practice, the most significant form of doubt is doubting that self-identity is in fact inconstant, ever changing. That even if we might intellectually accept that, in our actions in the world, we pretty much follow an understanding of having a constant self, a self that has been, in some ways, in some core ways, the same since we were young. And so we examine our life and we create a pattern of experiences that we connect and make a narrative, and that's our self-identity that we come back to over and over again. Which is fine, except for the fact that we forget that we're the ones who just made that up. We're the ones who are connecting random points that are remembered by this current experience, by now. And that when I remember what it was like when I was 4, and when I was 10, when I was 15, and on and on and on, the remembering is current. It's happening in this moment. And it's happening with the perceptual system that is actually 73 years old. It's not the perceptual system of the 4-year-old or the 10-year-old or the 15-year-old. And in truth, I have no idea what the perception at the time would have been. I make up a story about it, but it's made up. It may be quite useful, this made-up story, and the narrative I create from looking at the connection that I am making up may be also quite useful. But when you forget that it's made up, and you believe that it is in fact the reality of your own experience, you make decisions and you act from something that is distorted. The distortion being the loss of awareness that it was a creation and not reality. The doubt that arises takes the form of creating a level of significance to that narrative, that story, that made-upness, a level of significance that is out of proportion to the reality that this is your creation. And it may be useful, just as a suggestion for practice. In this case, not practice sitting on the cushion so much as just life in general, is to step back a ways, become a little bit more spacious, and notice the story that's being created as a creation, and saying, oh, it's interesting, that this is what's going on now, is that this story is arising now. Not getting lost in the content of the story, but rather tasting the story, noticing its flavor, feeling the story, noticing its texture. Being companionably with the story, affectionately, going, oh, hello, old story. This version's a little interesting. I like it. Or, this version is a nightmare. Why am I doing this to myself? Staying in the seat of knowing that this is a story, being mindful this is a creation, and not getting lost in the content. This is just a variation of our anapanasati practice, the practice of knowing breathing in, knowing breathing out, resting in the knowing, so that when a story comes up while you're sitting, you know that a story comes up, and you don't go with the content. You just rest in the awareness that thinking is happening. And if the content is drawing you, you calm that energy by going back to the breath. That's our practice. So where do rites and rituals come in? And we have a lot of rites and rituals in our culture. In the Asian Buddhist world, for many, many, many people, millions, the rites and rituals are their practice. Sitting meditation is not. Lighting candles, chanting suttas, many other different practices. And these practices are very rewarding. They, in a sense, form gates to deeper states and to a connection, a community, all life. So they're beautiful. The fetter, the manacle that keeps us from freedom, is clinging to the rites and rituals. Clinging as though the bell we ring at the beginning of the sit is the practice. It's not the practice, it's a gate that opens the door to practice. It reminds us and softens our body and mind in preparation for practice. But the bell itself is not the practice. But it's a beloved ritual. Ajahn Sumedho says that his modern interpretation of rites and rituals that he sees more relevant in our common culture is clinging to cultural conditioning. That's our rites and rituals, the way that we were conditioned during our lives to have understandings about what was important, how things work, and that instead of investigating for ourselves with direct experience, we absorb the teachings of the common culture, and those become our rites and rituals. So, we wear clothing that is part of our common culture. We have our hair in such a manner that is befitting the common culture. And we identify ourselves in a whole variety of ways, many of which come from the common culture. And once again, there's a forgetting. And the forgetting is the common culture itself is made up. It's not intrinsic. It's a series of choices made by our ancestors going back 10,000 years and more. Choices about how to organize with each other, how to relate to each other, how to deal with the reality we find ourselves living in. One of the choices we make, which is a common choice among animals, is seeking shelter. Most animals seek shelter. Very few animals just stay out in whatever weather there is, though some do. But we're shelter seekers. And we have been creating shelters for, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Ever more refined shelters. So it's an incredibly humid day where I am. I have air conditioning on and my house is all closed up. I am not only sheltered, I'm completely separated. Where did that come from? That I should be so convinced that sitting in 90-something% humidity is unacceptable. And that I should have the privilege of being able to separate myself from it. Frankly, I like it. And frankly, I don't like it. Both. Both. I want to be outside. I want to play outside. And I'm uncomfortable. Maybe it's just because I'm an old man. Maybe if I was younger, I wouldn't care. So I use that as an example because I do the same thing with states of mind, with states of heart, with states of body. I have been culturally conditioned so that states of mind that arise very frequently are the result of cultural conditioning, the result of things I imbibed from the world all through my life. concerns that I have, worries that I have, delights that I have, that really didn't grow out of my own experience, but more out of the common experience, the way that we share things. And they cause me to have a view that is separate, that becomes a view that is self, that I like this, I don't like this, I want it to be different in this way, I don't want it to be different in that way. I have lots of preferences. How many of those preferences are conditioning that came from the culture that I just swallowed and accept? How many of them, and quite a few, are conditioning I created myself as a way to be counter to the culture? So in a sense, very much still cultural conditioning. But I'm, oppositional in certain areas. And I do things differently. The fetter is clinging to rites and rituals, clinging to cultural conditioning. Clinging first requires ignorance. You're not mindful that this is what's occurring. You're not mindful that this is the root of having that pattern of thought and feeling and sensation in the body as a result of cultural conditioning. So the practice is the practice of mindfulness. That's what we practice. And what we're looking for is not to be free of cultural conditioning, but to be free of clinging, to abide independent of cultural conditioning, using it appropriately, immersing ourselves in it appropriately when it feels wholesome and fit, and saying no thank you when it's inappropriate or unwholesome. But you can't make those choices. You can't have that agency without knowing that this is occurring. First, you have to know that you're thinking or feeling or experiencing something. If you don't know you're thinking or feeling or experiencing it, it's pretty hard to work with it. So that's our practice, the practice of establishing mindfulness so that we recognize what's occurring in experience moment after moment. And then the next piece, which is this piece that the fetters are illuminating, is, so what is this that has shown up? Oh, it's self-identity. Oh, it's doubt. Oh, it's clinging to cultural conditioning. And then you can choose. The fetters bring more depth to your choices than just, oh, I'm thinking, I'll go back to the breath. It changes it to something like, oh, I'm thinking as a result of cultural conditioning. That's quite interesting, you say. I'm not going to get caught in this, you decide. I'm going back to the breath. It deepens how it is that patterns and habits of thought, of heart, of body, how they arise, how our perceptual system is formed. The depth of understanding is so very valuable. So we should practice this. So let's give it a try. Breathing in, I know that I am breathing in. Breathing out, I know that I am breathing out. Breathing in, I know that I am breathing in. Breathing out, I know that I am breathing out. Breathing in, no. Breathing in. Breathing out, no. Breathing out. Breathing in,